Marvel movies are some of the most popular events in cinemas these days, but they're often only as good as the cast. Sometimes, an actor just ain't right for the role, or that entire franchise needs to be rebooted to save it. A new face is brought in and it elevates whatever came before it.
Training into PTSD. No, I've spent 37 years pretending to be people.
That's what we're going to be talking about here, and to give a shout out to all those actors who made these characters great on screen.
Next time, baby.
The original Iron Man film is the very first foray into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and as such, it is the stepping stone for the franchise's first recast. The character of James Rhodes was originally played by Terrence Howard, who was a few years fresh off his acclaimed role in Hustle and Flow. Unfortunately for Howard, he never got to put on the War Machine and save the world next to Iron Man. While there is no official word why Howard was quietly recast, the rumor comes down to money. During the first Iron Man film, Howard was the highest paid actor on the job, but allegedly grew frustrated with Robert Downey Jr.'s rising payday during sequel negotiations. When Howard refused to take a cut, he was replaced by Don Cheadle. Howard has been pretty vocal about the recasting, stating, "Contracts that we write and sign aren't worth the paper that they're printed on sometimes." There's no doubt Howard and Downey had a great rapport on screen in the first movie, and we have to wonder how the MCU would have played out if Howard did take the pay cut to continue on with the franchise. So, X-Men Origins isn't a particularly great movie. The film had a troubled production to say the least, with same-day rewrites occurring often. The film also almost ruined Deadpool, but while the end result was rocky, there was one area that the film actually improved upon in the original film. That part was the production opting to cast Liev Schreiber as Sabretooth as opposed to using Tyler Mane from the first X-Men movie. Tyler Mane, a professional wrestler, did a great job being the menacing henchman to Magneto in the film, but Origins required more nuance from the character. The film was largely about the rocky and troubled relationship between brothers Wolverine and Sabretooth, and Tyler Mane was actually never considered for the sequel. Instead, Hugh Jackman championed his friend Schreiber for the role. Jackman and Schreiber were standouts, and were still a little bitter that he didn't at least cameo in the Logan movie. Considering he helped carry that movie and was an important part of the story, it would have been nice to get a conclusion to that thread. The Punisher has had a rocky way of it on the big screen. Dolph Lundgren stepped into the shoes of Frank Castle back in 1989, and was followed up by interpretations by Thomas Jane and Ray Stevenson. While those movies have their fans, neither really captured the spirit, humanity, and pain that Frank Castle carries with him. Enter Jon Bernthal, who first appeared as the character during the second season of Netflix Daredevil. His gritty and world-weary version of New York's own Frank Castle suddenly injected life into the vigilante. Sure, he was doing some pretty terrible things, but then again, this is the Punisher, and those criminals had it coming. But it wasn't all action and intense violence that won over fans. Bernthal added a layer of humanity that was previously lacking in other interpretations. The whole of Penny and Dime, the fourth episode of season 2 of Daredevil, might be some of the best Marvel you can get at Netflix, and that's thanks largely to Bernthal. While it is unlikely, we hope to see Bernthal continue his portrayal of Castle at some point. Unless you're a diehard fan of minute detailings in the MCU, you likely didn't even catch this recast. In the first Iron Man movie, Howard Stark was actually played by a different actor than all the other appearances before the 1950s. We mentioned the 50s because Dominic Cooper played the character in the first Avenger and the Peggy Carter Show. That aside though, we got Gerard Sanders as Howard Stark in the first Iron Man. The actor looks a lot like how he shows up in later films, complete with a trademark mustache. But Sanders only appeared in photographs in that movie. Perhaps Marvel didn't yet realize how important Howard would become in the plot and to Tony, especially come Civil War. So to make sure that the scenes had significant weight, Sanders was replaced with Mad Men actor John Slattery, who has appeared as Howard Stark 4 times as of Endgame. While he hasn't saved the movie per se, he did allow us to buy into Tony's grief come Civil War, and the father-son reunion in Endgame was touching and sweet. We're glad Marvel decided to ensure Howard Stark was in good hands. When you think Nick Fury, you think Samuel L. Jackson. The acting legend was actually the inspiration for Brian Michael Bendis and Mike Allred when it came time to reimagine the character, so it's fitting he should portray him on the big screen. But this wasn't the original design for the Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. When it came time to make the Nick Fury Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. television movie in 1998 on Fox, Fury looked quite different on the comic books. With a chiseled jaw, gray streaks in the hair, and yes, Caucasian, Fury looked an awful lot like David Hasselhoff, which is why it would be no surprise to learn that the Hoff himself was the original actor to play Fury before the MCU was ever a thing. There's a reason why we don't talk about the TV movies these days.
Oh, look, Fury! You're too late!
With a rating of 16% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 3.7 on IMDb, it didn't fare too well.
Tell me, how's Hydra's dental plan?
Thankfully, when the MCU came around, they used the ultimate Marvel version of Fury that was made by Bendis and Allred, and the rest is history. The Venom movie from 2018 has both fans and haters. The film got a mixed reception to say the least, but did very well at the box office. Enough so that there is an anticipated sequel in the works with Andy Serkis directing. Regardless if you love or hate this film, there is one thing that should unify all fans on this debate, and that's Tom Hardy. The veteran actor elevates anything he's in, and Venom is no exception to this rule. What's more is that Hardy is leaps and bounds better than the Venom that we got in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3. We're still reeling from that one bit. Yeah, that didn't go over very well. Raimi was pretty open about not wanting to include Venom in his movie, but the studio forced him to include the popular villain. Since Raimi wasn't into the character, he ended up feeling very tacked on and half-baked, unlike Hardy's work. Are you excited for Venom 2? Let us know in the comments. After Robert Downey Jr. kicked off the MCU with the first Iron Man movie, the torch had to be passed on to keep the hype going. The baton was passed on to Edward Norton, who portrayed the Incredible Hulk. While the film wasn't a runaway hit like Iron Man, Norton was praised for his portrayal of Bruce Banner. He was expected to return for the Avengers, but due to creative differences with Marvel, he lost the job. Marvel would state in a release that they were looking for an actor who embodies the creativity and collaborative spirit of our other talented cast members. When it came time for the Avengers, fans got to see Mark Ruffalo in the role. While it was certainly a bit jarring to see a new actor in the cinematic universe, we have to say that Ruffalo owns the role. What's amazing is that Norton wasn't bad as Bruce Banner either, but Ruffalo elevated what came before him. Ruffalo also had the chance to play with many versions of the Hulk, from stoic Banner in Ultron to smart Hulk in Endgame, so it's never the same routine for the audience. When you think of Thanos, chances are you think of Josh Brolin. The actor completely owns the role in Infinity War and Endgame and was actually cast for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. But that movie came out in 2014, 2 years after the first Avengers came out. As you'll recall, Thanos showed up during the after credits of that movie. Not only that, but the Mad Titan looked very different than how he did in later movies. Not only was this due to the final design of Thanos not being achieved yet, but because it wasn't Josh Brolin on set to play the character. Not only that, but the 2012 version of Thanos wasn't just a CGI face. Despite having no lines, there was actually an actor on set to bring Thanos to life. That actor was stuntman Damian Poitier. Basically, Marvel really wanted to get a quick Thanos tease in and didn't have a trained actor. Getting Poitier in quickly delivered the promise, but they knew they'd have to get someone with more acting chops down the line. Okay, so there have been a lot of Peter Parkers on the big screen, and they've all been very different from each other. While the movies themselves may not be considered as classic as, say, Spider-Man 2, we think it's fair to say that Tom Holland is the best Peter Parker. What makes him so memorable and lovable is the fact that he actually looks and acts like a high schooler, unlike Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield before him. Don't get us wrong, both were fine portrayals, and we stand by Sam Raimi's first 2 Spider-Man movies being gold, but Holland simply captures the spirit of the character better. He's quite the chatterbox and is the lovable dork we know from the source material. He loves Lego and movies and is always ready with some sort of quip. We buy that he's a high schooler with real teenager issues while also juggling the great power and great responsibility dilemma. What's more is that Holland looks like a child having the best day of his life whenever he talks about the movie, and that's gold right there. Ben Affleck's Daredevil flick was a bit rough to say the least, which is a shame because the former Batman is actually a huge fan of The Man with No Fear. The main problem with the Daredevil movie is that it tried to do so much in so little time. There was enough material there to make a trilogy, and as such, the characterization of Matt Murdock suffered. The same cannot be said of Charlie Cox's portrayal of the Devil of Hell's Kitchen on the Netflix series. Cox is a great actor, and he was able to bring a lot of empathy and sorrow to the troubled hero. He's cold-blooded in one scene and full of regret and compassion in others. What's more is that Charlie Cox is also a force to be reckoned with. Chief example, of course, is the fan-favorite and frankly iconic fight scene in Season 3. The sequence was a one-shot that lasted just over 11 minutes, and Cox was unmasked for the whole thing. Beast mode, man! Charlie Cox, we miss your portrayal of Daredevil, and hope to see you return one day to the character.